Why do you keep worrying even when you want to stop? Nothing has happened yet. The result isn't in. The message hasn't been answered. The future is still completely unopened. And yet, your mind is already there, already rehearsing disaster, already living inside a catastrophe that doesn't exist. What if it goes wrong? What if I mess this up? What if the worst thing happens and I can't handle it? Here's the strange part. You already know this isn't helping. You know that more worrying won't make tomorrow any safer. You genuinely want to stop. And still, you don't. So what is actually going on? Let me give you the first uncomfortable answer. Most worry is not trying to solve the problem. It is trying to preserve the feeling that you still have some control. That's why it feels so convincing. Worry disguises itself as responsibility. It whispers, "I'm just being careful." It says, "I'm just thinking ahead." It tells you, "I'm just trying to be prepared." But if you look closely, that is not what's happening. What's actually happening is this. Fear is borrowing the language of intelligence. Mental activity is being used to cover up a deeper feeling you don't want to face. And that feeling is simple. If the worst really happens, I may not be able to bear it. Once that fear activates, the whole cycle begins. It usually looks like this. Uncertainty appears. Worry kicks in. A deeper belief wakes up. The belief that you may not be able to bear the worst-case scenario. So the mind starts reaching for control. You replay, you predict, you scan, you rehearse. And for a brief moment, all that mental movement gives you a strange kind of relief. Not because you're actually safer, but because worrying creates the sensation that you are still doing something. That tiny sensation is enough to keep the loop alive. So the cycle becomes uncertainty, worry, fear that you can't bear the worst, grabbing for control, more rehearsal, a little false relief, and then more worry. This is why worry feels so sticky. It's not just a passing emotion, it is a structure, a loop that feeds itself. And here's the hardest part. Most of the time, this process doesn't feel dramatic from the inside. It feels reasonable. Your brain won't flash a subtitle saying, "Start worrying now." That's how you stay safe. It's not that obvious. It works more like a deeply buried background program, quietly hijacking your reactions. On the surface, it feels like you're just thinking things through. But underneath, a whole system is already running. This is where Buddhist psychology gives us a very useful map. Because it doesn't just tell you to calm down, it tries to show you what is actually moving inside the mind. There's one term that matters a lot here. Self-grasping. In Sanskrit, ātmagrāha. And no, this isn't just selfishness. It's not simply thinking too much about yourself. Self-grasping is a deep inner movement that keeps trying to secure a stable sense of me. It says, I must be okay. I must not collapse. I must not lose control. I need to hold myself together. I need reality to stay manageable. For me, that grasping becomes especially active when life turns uncertain. Why? Because uncertainty threatens the illusion that the self can stay fully in charge. And the self does not like that. So it reaches. It reaches for explanation, for certainty, for prediction, for any thought that might make reality feel more controllable. That is why worry can feel weirdly protective, not because it solves the future, but because it gives self-grasping something to do. It says, as long as I keep thinking, I am not completely helpless yet. And that is the trap. You think you're dealing with the situation, but very often you are defending the self against uncertainty. Now, if we go one step further into Yogācāra, the map becomes even more precise. The first 6 consciousnesses engage the world. You see, You hear, you feel, you think, experience arrives. At that point, it's still just information. A message hasn't been answered. A result is unknown. A meeting is tomorrow. A diagnosis isn't in. A decision hasn't been made. At first, this is just what's happening. But then something shifts. The event stops being just an event and starts becoming what this means for me. That shift is crucial. In Yogācāra terms, the seventh consciousness is deeply involved in this turn. It doesn't simply register what happened. It personalizes it. It self-references it. It wraps it around identity. So instead of the result is still unknown, it becomes, what if this means I'm not safe? Instead of this situation is unresolved, it becomes, what if this turns into something I cannot handle? Instead of I don't know what will happen, it becomes, what if what happens breaks me? If you want a modern translation, think of it as a system that is highly prone to self-referencing, excessive attribution, and the constant maintenance of a coherent self-model. In simpler words, something happens, and the mind refuses to leave it alone as an external event. It immediately starts asking, what does this mean about me? What does this mean for my safety? Can I bear what this might become? That is where worry becomes charged, because now you're not just facing uncertainty, you're facing uncertainty as a threat to the self. And once that happens, the nervous system joins in. This is where modern neuroscience gives us a clear picture. The brain likes familiar pathways. It likes efficiency. It likes routes it has traveled many times before. If your system has repeatedly learned that uncertainty leads to threat prediction, then the next time uncertainty shows up, the old route fires quickly. Your body tightens, your chest contracts, your thoughts narrow. Your attention shifts toward danger before conscious reflection has fully caught up. By the time you say, I know this is pointless, the loop is already running. That is why so many people say, I know it's useless, but I still can't stop. That's not denial. Most of the time, it's accurate, because knowing lives at one level. Conditioned reaction lives at another. The surface mind says, this is unnecessary. The deeper system says, no, stay alert. Keep scanning. Keep rehearsing. We are not safe yet. This also explains why positive affirmations often fail. You tell yourself, it's okay, relax. I'm safe, don't overthink. Everything will be fine. Those words aren't completely useless, but they often touch only the top layer. Meanwhile, the deeper program is still running. One layer offers comfort. Another layer is still issuing emergency signals. Not in words, but in tension, in anticipation, in reflex. That is why replacing thoughts is often not enough, because the problem isn't only what you're consciously telling yourself. The problem is what your system has learned to do with uncertainty. This is where another Buddhist idea becomes very practical. Habit energy, conditioned momentum, or if you prefer, karma in a very grounded sense. Not cosmic punishment, not fate from the sky. Just this. What you repeat becomes easier to repeat. What you reinforce becomes more available. A reaction rehearsed many times starts to feel like who you are. If for years you've used worry to handle uncertainty, then worry stops being just a mood. It becomes a groove, a reflex, a default road in the mind. That's why it feels automatic, because it is automatic, at least for now. So, what do you do? Most people want a fast answer here. A trick, a technique, a switch that shuts the machine off tonight. But the first real shift is not how do I never worry again. The first real shift is this. Can I see the mechanism while it's happening? That is awareness, and awareness is not just knowledge. It's not saying, wow, that makes sense. It's not collecting spiritual vocabulary. It's not admiration, it's not commentary. Awareness is practice. It is the ability in real time to notice. Worry has started. My mind is drifting toward the worst case scenario. I'm assuming I can't bear something that hasn't even happened yet. I'm trying to steal back control through mental activity. Self-grasping is active right now. That moment changes everything. Not because the fear instantly disappears, not because uncertainty suddenly becomes pleasant, but because the process is no longer completely invisible. And once a process becomes visible, it loses some of its power. You may still worry. You may still feel the pull. You may still get dragged halfway into the old maze. But now, there is space, and space is no small thing. Because freedom is not the total absence of anxious weather. Freedom is the growing ability to notice the weather without handing over the whole house. At first, maybe you catch the loop after 20 minutes, then after 10, then halfway through. Then maybe right at the moment uncertainty appears and the inner machinery begins to hum. That earlier noticing is precious, because once you can see the program, you are no longer fully merged with it. And once you're not fully merged with it, you don't have to obey it in the same way. There is something almost theatrical about this. So many of us live on an inner stage, rehearsing catastrophe for an audience that never arrives. The tragedy is not that the mind writes fearful scenes. The tragedy is that we keep mistaking rehearsal for reality. The curtain hasn't risen, the future hasn't entered the room, and still, the actor inside keeps pacing beneath an anxious light. Practice begins when you finally sit back and notice. Ah, this play again. Same stage, same script, same promise that if I keep performing fear, I might outrun uncertainty. But I won't, and I don't need to. So, why do you keep worrying even when you want to stop? Because you're not dealing with one isolated thought. You are meeting an entire conditioned system, a hidden fear that you can't bear the worst, a reflex to seize control, a self-structure that turns events into threats, an old neural pathway that fires fast, a habit energy rehearsed too many times. No wonder it feels automatic. But automatic does not mean permanent. Familiar does not mean essential. Condition does not mean destiny. That matters. Because if the loop was learned, it can be seen. If it can be seen, it can be interrupted. And if it can be interrupted, it no longer owns you in the same way. So the next time worry rises, maybe don't begin with, how do I kill this immediately? Begin somewhere gentler. Ask, what triggered this? What am I imagining? What am I assuming I can't bear? What control am I trying to recover through worry? What is self-grasping trying to protect right now? That question alone can shift the moment, not because it removes uncertainty, but because it turns blind reaction into observed process. And once something is truly observed, it starts losing its spell. You may still feel it, but you no longer have to become it. The world is not ending. The background program is trying to take over again. See it, stay with it. Don't become it. That is where the loop begins to break.